It's a great pleasure to me to introduce Brian and welcome him to this AGM. I met Brian in 2009 when he organised a meeting which was hosted jointly by the Interfaith Network in London and what was then the British Humanist Association. And it was a meeting to bring together people from different religious traditions and humanists to talk about matters of common concern and the possibility of dialogue. And since then, I've worked a lot with Brian on trying to promote dialogue between people with religious and non-religious beliefs. And over the time of working with him since then, I've become very much aware of how that project is very much a continuation of the ideas and commitments that inspired him to set up the National Interfaith Network, of which he was, of course, founding director and ran very skillfully for many years. I've come to appreciate his strong commitment to the whole idea of working together, understood in a very active way as a commitment to active dialogue, to talking to one another, listening to one another, learning from one another. And I've also become increasingly aware of the skills that he brings to promoting these activities, skills of networking in the best possible sense, of bringing people together. I've realized that let's meet for lunch is an important string to his bow in that respect. But all these various skills clearly have been honed over his many years as a very distinguished member of the civil service. And we, both in the Interfaith Network and in this further work, have been very much the beneficiaries of those skills. In working for him, I've, in conversation, often heard him refer to his experience of setting up the Interfaith Network, but I've never heard him talk about it at length. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing about that now, and I'm sure you all are very much looking forward to it. And if I may, Brian, I will hand over to you. Thank you very much for coming.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for those kind words. And of course, I would want to reciprocate in terms of how much I have enjoyed working with you on the so-called Religion and Atheism project. I'm delighted to be able to join you all this evening. And my topic, building the Interfaith Network for the UK, some personal reflections, has stirred in me some very enjoyable recollections. Indeed, I fear that my talk may well interest me much more than it will be of interest to the rest of you, for which I would apologize at the outset. These days, I have been, as Richard has indicated, engaged on much less in interfaith activity than on the project that Richard mentioned, and as such, I've had perhaps less time than I would have liked to take forward my interfaith work. But I see the religion and atheism, or perhaps better, religion and humanist project, as, if you like, a logical next step in the road in terms of dialogue. How did I first become involved in interfaith work? A layman, but interested in theology. I recently found a piece written years ago for the magazine of my local church with the title One World, One God. And that has echoes both in terms of interfaith engagement and also the other engagement of which I just mentioned. I had joined the World Congress of Faiths and the Council of Christians and Jews, and helped to establish the South London Interfaith Group, which recently celebrated its 40th year. In the late 1970s, I was invited to join the then British Council of Churches Committee on Relations with People of Other Faiths, rather clumsily known as CROP-OFF. The committee's meetings were absolutely fascinating in those early days of interfaith engagement. It was Kenneth Cracknell, a Methodist minister and secretary of CROP-OFF, who brought me on board. He knew of my interest in interfaith dialogue and perhaps thought that as a civil servant working in the Treasury, I would know how to raise some funding. I can't say that I fully matched his expectations in that regard. In the spring of 1983, we launched a newsletter called Interfaith News, which was sponsored by CROP-OFF itself, the Interfaith Association, the Week of Prayer for World Peace, the World Conference on Religion and Peace, and the World Congress of Faiths, which alone continues in the same form. In the course of 1984, the idea arose of my taking a year off to explore how to strengthen the framework for interfaith activity. And this took me across the whole of the UK. 3 conferences were held beginning in January 1985. And with the first constitution of the new Interfaith Network for the UK, adopted in March 1987, with a public launch with 60 members that June. So my year off had lasted 2.5 years by then. By this time, a new interfaith body of this kind was, I think, fully warranted. Today, it has around 180 member bodies, including 100 local interfaith members. I think it was helpful that I was a layman and had a career in the civil service, which meant that from the outset, I saw myself as a servant of the process which was taking place and of the new body when this emerged. I felt a bit embarrassed because I didn't want it to look as though I had spent 2.5 years trying to create an organization for me to run myself. But I was reassured by the first 2 co-chairs, Rabbi Hugh Brin and the Bishop of Stepney, Jim Thompson at the time, who were the initial co-chairs and had co-chaired the consultative process, that since I was the person who knew most of the people who'd been involved in that process, it was entirely helpful for me to become its first director. And of course, it helped as well that I was able to take early retirement from the civil service and didn't require a salary. I was much too keen to raise money to make sure that I had at least a few colleagues. From the outset, the Interfaith Network has had 4 categories of member bodies, as you may know. Firstly, national faith community organizations. Representative bodies of this kind had been invited to participate in the initial conferences, but they wanted to join the Interfaith Network alongside other categories of membership, for which we were very pleased. Christians and Jews, of course, already had a linking body, but the Interfaith Network brought a wider range into membership together. IFN, or Interfaith Network, was from its early stages drawn into engagement with government, which increased sharply after, in 2001, the disturbances which you may remember in the north of England, and the impact soon after that of the 9/11 attacks in the United States, followed by the attacks here in Britain in July 2005. Interfaith Network's relationship with government has had its ups and downs, but it has been an important area of engagement with government. In earlier days, member bodies in this category were drawn from 9 different world faith traditions. In recent times, of course, the membership has been opened more widely. The second category, national and regional interfaith organisations, includes a number of UK branches of international interfaith organisations. The Interfaith Network itself has not joined any of those member organisations, despite having been invited to do so, because we thought that it would be embarrassing just to join one international organisation and not the others, and we preferred to focus on our work here in the UK. Interfaith Network had also set up interfaith organisations for Scotland and for Wales. There had, interestingly enough, already been set up an interfaith organisation for Northern Ireland, and that was already in place. Then third category, the local interfaith organisations like your own. Local interfaith organisations are, of course, not branches of the Interfaith Network, but are members in their own right. Their role is, of course, of great importance in promoting good interfaith relations at ground level across the whole country. When the Interfaith Network was formed in 1987, there were just 60 local interfaith organisations. Now there are well over 100 in interfaith membership and many more besides. And so the growth of local interfaith activity has been of enormous importance. The fourth and last category, last but not least, educational and academic bodies. I became aware on my initial encounters when the idea of the Interfaith Network was under consideration, how crucially important was the role of educational and academic institutions. And so in terms of promoting good interfaith relations and understanding. And we were delighted when educational and academic bodies agreed to join the network on that basis. And I'm aware, of course, of the important work that your chair, Lynn, has undertaken relevant to that in her own career. In September 2007, I handed over to Harriet Crabtree as director of the network. She had for many years served as the Interfaith Network's deputy director, but effectively we worked as a partnership. And much of the best of the Interfaith Network's work has been due to her and her creativity. And I hope that some of you have already had the chance to meet her or will do so at some later stage. I stayed on for a while as advisor on faith and public life to the Interfaith Network. And it was in that context and the setting up of the first Interfaith Week in 2009 that I found myself organizing the event to which Richard has already referred, bringing together both humanists and those involved in interfaith work in different religious communities. Richard was, of course, the immediate choice by the then British Humanist Association to represent them alongside a Catholic philosopher, John Cottingham. And I think the choice of two philosophers worked very well for us on that occasion. That event led to a published book, Religion and Atheism, perhaps over-optimistically with the subtitle Beyond the Divide, came out a little later than that. And since then, there has been a series of further meetings in which Richard has played a very prominent role, but which I hope will soon lead to some further published material. It has, of course, been a great privilege for me to have been involved in some of the activity I have so briefly described. And now, as I look back on my life as an octogenarian, there are many highlights, but I would pick out just a few, perhaps, in closing. First of all, attending an event at the Vatican on the 28th of October 1999, at which I found myself addressing a large crowd in St. Peter's Square about local interfaith activity in this country, with a long line of cardinals sitting in front of me, and Pope John Paul II and the Dalai Lama sitting behind me. So I was in good company. A televised event organized by the Interfaith Network and the then government in the Royal Gallery of the House of Lords on 3rd January 2000 to mark the new millennium. And that, as a result of a late decision to do so, was televised, as was indeed the Vatican event, which I mentioned. I think of an event at Buckingham Palace on the 10th of June 2002 to mark the Queen's Golden Jubilee, preceded by a gathering which was attended by Prince Charles of school children at St. James's Palace. And that was a wonderful success. And I was intrigued by realizing that the value of the event was not simply the profile which it gave the Interfaith Network, but also I realized that we were actually helping the monarchy, because the TV organization, which was preparing for a debate on the future of the monarchy to be broadcast a little later, used clips extensively in that debate from our event at Buckingham Palace. I could go on in my memories, but I have already perhaps overstepped my limit. I hope very much that you may have some comments and recollections of your own to offer, and perhaps some questions.
Thank you so much for your personal reflections. But can we take some questions now and some comments? That's Mike Steigel and then Mike Walling.
Hi, Brian.
Hello. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. One of the things that is often leveled at interfaith in general is that, oh, it's all about talking about the nice, easy subjects and that sort of thing. Now, both you and I will know that that's far from the case, and that quite often you do tackle the challenging things, but you do it in a way that makes it possible for everybody to actually be heard properly and that sort of thing. Have you got any recollections of the more challenging situations that you've encountered?
Well, perhaps I shouldn't offer some details of those, but you and I will know certainly that there have been problems at various points. I always take the view that it's important to bring people gently into the process of interfaith relations, or for that matter, any other dialogue, because people have to feel secure. They have to know the context that they're in. And then perhaps they can then begin to raise difficult questions, but knowing that they are safe in doing that, and that the colleagues with whom they're speaking are willing to hear what is said. And so I think it's very important, as it were, to go gently, but certainly not to simply set to one side the difficult questions on the basis that that makes life more easy.
Thank you. And Mike Walling?
Well, I really just want to say thank you to Brian, not just for that wonderful talk, which has evoked so many wonderful memories, but also to thank him for the interfaith movement, which has encouraged this organization, Candifer, right from the start. You know, helped us tremendously. And yes, I think we would be a very different organization without it. That's all I wanted to say. But you've brought back so many memories. I have.
Yes.
And there's another, as another octogenarian Methodist minister, I remember Ken Cracknell and his great influence.
Yes, yes. Now I'm afraid living in a hospital in the United States. I of course was one of many people who were involved in Interfaith in its earlier days, and I always saw myself as someone who was not at all an expert, but who might be able to help in some of the framing of the conversation and the institutional arrangements that might be valuable. And I, of course, sat at the feet of people who were deeply steeped in their own religious tradition and engaged in wonderful interfaith dialogue already, long before the Interfaith Network was created.
Thank you. Bryony, and then Craig and Gazwan.
Thank you. I would like to ask if the Interfaith Network has found it necessary to speak with the Russian Orthodox Church about the present situation between Russia and Ukraine and the role that that church is playing to try to contain Putin or to support Putin, or what exactly is their position? Are you in touch with them at all?
I'm not in touch with them specifically on that point, and I would hesitate to offer a comment on that, other than for us to be aware, as I think we are, of the close links that there has been between the Russian Orthodox Church and Vladimir Putin. And I think that obviously is a situation we have to be aware of. The Interfaith Network has always navigated very carefully in dealing with overseas events. And certainly on a number of occasions, the line which the network has taken has been that we are concerned primarily with what the impact of overseas events. What I was just saying was that the Interfaith Network has on a number of occasions wanted to say that its main role is dealing with the implications for relations in this country of overseas events, rather than claiming to involve itself in those events directly. I mean, obviously the events can't be ignored, but the Interfaith Network and its role is very much focused on interfaith relations in this country.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for your talk. I wondered, on looking back, what lessons you've drawn for future engagement, whether there are kind of new challenges ahead, or if the future is tackling the same issues as there have been in the past. And also, if I may be greedy and kind of add a supplementary to that, I mean, I've always been someone who's engaged in interfaith dialogue, but as someone who is a newbie to this network, this is only my second meeting. What advice would you give me?
To enjoy yourself and to derive a good deal of pleasure in developing relationships with the new people that you are meeting. I think that there has, of course, in the past been quite a discussion as to how far interfaith relationships are about looking at the content of different religious traditions and how they relate to one another, but also, of course, how different religious groups are engaging with problems in society. And of course, all religious groups have concerns of that kind. Sometimes it's argued that it's far more important to engage with political and social issues than it is to promote dialogue and an attempt to understand better different people's religious traditions. It seems to me that that is actually where the term both and comes in, because you don't have to choose between the two, and each of them strengthens the other.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. And Gazwan?
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian, for this interesting resume of the interfaith activity in this country. But I have been thinking, are there any similar activities in other European countries or elsewhere? And if there is any international relationships, something like a conference?
There are. I'm not up to date on the territory. I mean, there have been attempts to form a European interfaith body. I'm not sure how strongly supported and widely supported that has been. I remember an occasion at an annual general meeting, such as yours, of the Interfaith Network. There was a very strong case put forward for saying that the Interfaith Network should become the European Interfaith Network. And the view which the Interfaith Network took at that time, and I think correctly so, was that it was important for us to focus our work on working in the Interfaith Network rather than trying to expand and perhaps then not actually being as useful as what we were doing in the attempt to get into further depth, because the wider you stretch what it is you're trying to do, the greater risk of that not being at a deep level.
Yeah, I mean,
that doesn't mean to say, of course, that there isn't an important role for interfaith organizations at all different levels.
Thank you. I think, Juliet, you had your hand up, and then Richard.
Brian, I just wanted to ask you whether you think that when Prince Charles becomes king and wants to become defender of all faiths, whether you think this will make a difference. I get quite excited at the prospect myself. I think it will take away the oppressiveness of Christianity being imposed upon the country. I wonder if I'm being a bit naive, or whether you would agree with me or not agree with me, and will it make any difference at all?
I'm not sure how crucial the issue is, and I'm not sure what we shall find happens, assuming that Prince Charles will in due course become King Charles. I tend to I don't always like to quote Donald Trump, but there is one of his phrases which I have found very helpful, which is, "We'll see what happens."
Yeah.
Thank you. Rick?
I guess the mention of Prince Charles and possibly even Donald Trump nicely leads into this. You mentioned, Brian, various prestigious events and prestigious locations where you were involved with the Interfaith Network, House of Lords and Buckingham Palace and so on. I just wondered whether you've got any reflections on relationships between the Interfaith Network and national government, whether national government has been supportive, has been helpful, and also perhaps whether you sometimes felt that there was a danger of getting too close to national government agendas and becoming too much a part of the establishment. Do you have any reflections on that relationship generally?
I think I have to be very careful in commenting on the contemporary scene for two reasons. First, because
this is the civil servant speaking now.
The civil servant speaking, and reflecting on the difficult life which one has trying to run the Interfaith Network without receiving comments from people gone past by, but also, but I think what one can say is that I think the Interfaith Network, to my knowledge, has always ensured that what it did with government was what it was willing to do for its own reasons. I mean, not just for governmental reasons. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, in parts, engagement with government by interfaith organizations, one hopes makes government more sensitive to the concerns and the issues of interfaith work, and also of faith communities themselves. But it's very important, not as you say, I think, it's very important not, as it were, to say, oh, how wonderful we're being talked with by government and we will agree with everything they say, because that's not helpful either to those organizations seeking engagement with government, or for that matter, to government itself, because you actually have to speak truthfully about how you understand the situation. I'm not sure that's very helpful, and it's certainly a very civil servantish.
Yes, that's not inconsistent with being very helpful as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sinan?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Many thanks, Brian. I feel really honored that you have come to visit us and give us a very interesting talk about the history. And in a way, we are grateful that your pioneering work, in a way, I suppose, made it possible for us to think about having our own interfaith group. I think the interfaith organizations are, I find it very, very important, because no matter what the religious background of different people, certainly the moral values are there, common to everyone. And to a certain extent, you know, even the, if you like, whoever one worships, it's really common in different ways, different names. So what I was thinking, with the good as it is with the United Nations, unfortunately, there is a control by the superpowers over United Nations. United Nations humanitarian work is good. I'm not criticizing that at all. But I think sometimes some of the resolutions that are taken, which I suppose it can't be helped, but certainly it's their arms have been twisted by the strong nations, and we see this happening now as well. I mean, the power of the veto makes it you can't really be neutral when with a veto everybody can't make a decision, and I think this is where probably an interfaith on an international level would be very much recommended, so that people are aware of the morals that seem to be missing. And one of the things that happened with the unfortunate Ukrainian war at the moment is that people have, it has been in the media, there has been a kind of double standards. The comments by a lot of the media is that these are not sort of people from, in a way, so the word is backward countries. These are not colored, they are blonde and blue-eyed, and that really was very unfortunate. It doesn't so belittle the suffering of the Ukrainian people, no matter what color they are. Certainly, personally, and my mosque actually is in favor of even sending donations to them. But the double standard, you see, when you see what happened, for example, to Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, and Syria. I mean, the leader has been dropping chemicals, and yet nobody is saying anything. While in Iraq, they were accused of chemical use, and there was no proof of that, or mass weapons of mass destruction. This is where the religious people can possibly have an influence in the world events. Thank you very much.
Well, I would just say, I mean, I think you have very effectively pointed out how complex the issues are which face us and how difficult those issues are. But I very much endorse your pointing to the importance of our ethical imperatives within different religious traditions. And of course, in the sort of conversations which Richard and I are currently involved in, the whole issue of how far more fully can one see common ground between people who are religious or of different religious traditions and people who are not. And I think that is very important. One of the early pieces of work which the Interfaith Network did was to hold a conference on the quest for common values. And that quest still continues and applies across the board. I mean, I think one of the fascinating documents in the recent years has been Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti, which is all about that what we are dealing with is the totality of humanity, not making divisions between different religious traditions, people who are religious and people who are not, but needing to look at the totality of humanity. And I think that's a very important theme. And I'm sure it will be an increasingly strong dimension in the way in which people of all kinds, of all beliefs, will find themselves dealing. I mean, there was the mention at the beginning of our session of something relating to the climate emergency. The climate emergency is requiring humanity to think in terms of the future of humanity, not just in our local area, but of course we have to attend to the local, the national, the regional, the international, all the difficult issues. And I've sometimes said in the past, if we all try to do everything, we shall end up with nobody doing anything. And of course, nobody can actually deal with everything. One has to make choices in terms of one's own capacities, one's own commitments, the areas that one is interested in. I'd just like to pick up on the point which you made at the beginning of your remarks, because I do want to emphasize that at the point when I started getting interested in interfaith work, there were a large number of people already engaged who knew far more about it than I did, and I sat at their feet, and I saw myself as perhaps being able to offer some piece of help through what we were doing in the Interfaith Network. But it was part of a growing army. Well, army is perhaps not the correct word to use in this context. A large number of people who were already involved in the process. I mean, there would have been no point in forming an Interfaith Network if there hadn't been any organization to the network.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just check, are there any other questions before I draw this part of our meeting to a close? Bryony, you're showing a yellow hand. Do you have another question? You're muted.
I do have another point, if there isn't anyone else to speak. It was just that it seems to me that when people make marriages, interracial marriages, interreligious marriages, they form a natural constituency for interfaith work. And I wonder if the Interfaith Network has any research on that subject, or has put out feelers or begun any sort of discussions with people who are really at the front of interfaith interaction. Speaking as someone who married a Hindu.
Again, I'm not up to date on this, but I know in some of the earlier years of the Interfaith Network, this issue was raised, and there were organizations forming focusing on this specific area. And obviously it's one which is very important and very delicate.
I think when I married my husband, the statistic was that it was 0.5% of marriages that were interfaith. It was very, very low, but I think it's a good deal more widespread now.
And there is, of course, with the whole area we haven't touched on because obviously time doesn't permit, but the whole area of the relationship between culture and religion.
Yes. Interestingly, my Hindu husband's Hindu sister was married to a Muslim in India quite soon after partition, which was even more difficult.
Yeah. And I think perhaps we are appreciating these days even more the value of stories in the sense of hearing people's account of their own lives and how they have dealt with the issues that have confronted them.
There might be another book in that.
Yeah, perhaps so.
Thank you.
Well, okay. Thank you so much, Brian. It's been really interesting and inspiring. Candifer has always been affiliated to the Interfaith Network, and we use their resources. But I think we've, in many ways, taken the Interfaith Network for granted, as if it has always been there. And you have opened up those early stages for us. And I think the vision and the commitment, both of yourself and of those 60 communities who initially joined with you to set up the network, and that vision and commitment, I think, will probably inspire us. It seems so important, especially nowadays, that we have an interfaith network. And I think many of the questions have alluded to that. and the positive influence that the Interfaith Network has had in some of the meetings since COVID, how much the local communities all over Britain have been an inspiration and have set up initiatives to support the whole community.
Yes.
That's happened in Canterbury, but it's happened a lot in the north of England as well, all over the country. And it's vital. And I think you've also identified something that we don't always give voice to, which is the sensitivities involved in interfaith work. And it is as well that we've been reminded of that. So thank you so much for giving your time this evening to talk to us, and for giving us such a stimulating discussion after your talk. Thank you very much indeed.
That's very kind. And may I say that, like you, I am full of admiration of my friends in the Interfaith Network who are dealing with the current crop of difficulties and troubles, but have worked so hard to achieve what they have done. Thank you.